Today, we're going to look at horrifying snake attacks. From a distracted researcher that got bitten by a copperhead, to an expert with 18 years of experience that forgot that snakes are capable of taking his life with one wrong move. Let's dive straight into it. The evening of June 15, 2014 brought oppressive humidity to Gainesville, Florida, with temperatures still hovering near 85 degrees even as the sun began to set. The thick, sweltering air made even routine tasks feel more laborious, and the climate-controlled reptile facilities offered welcome relief from the stifling heat outside. Robert Bob Hendricks was conducting his routine evening feeding at his specialized python facility, taking advantage of the cooler evening hours when his animals were most active. At 43, Bob had built an impeccable reputation over 18 years of breeding large constrictors, supplying his specimens to zoos and research facilities across the Southeast. His colleagues knew him for his meticulous safety protocols and deep understanding of giant snake behavior. He had never had a serious incident in his entire career. At 9:45 p.m., Bob was preparing to feed his most impressive specimen, an 18-foot, 180-pound female Burmese python he had raised from a hatchling over 8 years. These serpents represent the pinnacle of constrictor evolution, capable of growing over 20 feet in length and weighing more than 200 pounds in exceptional cases. Burmese pythons are among the most powerful constrictors in the world, with muscular bodies perfectly designed for overpowering large prey through sheer crushing force. The Burmese python's hunting strategy is a masterpiece of predatory efficiency. These massive snakes are ambush predators that can remain motionless for days, while waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Their heat-sensing abilities allow them to detect warm-blooded prey from remarkable distances, while their incredible strength enables them to overpower animals as large as deer, wild boar, and even alligators in their native Southeast Asia habitat. When a Burmese python strikes, the attack is devastatingly effective. They don't just constrict around their prey, they position their coils with mechanical precision, applying pressure that can exceed 90 pounds per square inch. These apex predators possess incredible strength that allows them to overpower prey much larger than themselves. A large Burmese python can exert enough constricting force to crush bones and compress vital organs, while their stamina allows them to maintain this pressure for extended periods. Their feeding response, once triggered, is relentless and methodical. They will not release their grip until they are certain their prey is completely subdued. This particular female was in peak condition, her body thick and muscular from years of proper care and feeding. She had been fasting for 4 weeks in preparation for breeding season, making her extremely food-motivated and responsive to feeding cues. Well-conditioned Burmese pythons in feeding mode are among the most dangerous animals to work with, as their predatory instincts are heightened and their strike response is lightning fast. Bob had been preparing to feed her a large rabbit using his standard safety protocols, feeding tongs, secure barriers, and maintaining safe distances at all times. However, as he maneuvered the prey item toward the feeding chamber, the rabbit slipped from his tongs and landed just inside the enclosure opening. Instead of using backup tongs or waiting for the snake to settle, Bob made a split-second decision that violated his own safety rules. Believing he could quickly retrieve the rabbit before the python could react, Bob reached into the enclosure with his bare hand. The moment his arm crossed the threshold, the python's predatory instincts were triggered. The massive python struck with explosive speed, her jaws clamping down on Bob's forearm with crushing force. Her backward curved teeth, each nearly an inch long, sank deep into his flesh and locked him in place. Before Bob could react or call for help, 180 pounds of pure muscle began wrapping around his arm and torso with mechanical precision. The snake's primitive brain had identified him as a threat or potential prey, and her constricting response was now fully activated. Each time Bob struggled or tried to pull away, the python's grip tightened automatically, her powerful muscles responding to his movements by increasing pressure. Bob's attempts to call for help were cut short as the python's grip tightened around his chest, making it impossible to draw a full breath. The snake's muscular coils responded to his struggles by constricting further. Each movement he made triggered an even tighter grip. His ribs began to compress under the tremendous force, and his vision started to darken as oxygen deprivation took hold. The constriction was methodical and relentless. Bob's consciousness faded as the python's coils compressed his chest and restricted blood flow to his brain. The snake maintained her grip for over 17 minutes after he stopped moving, her primitive instincts ensuring that her perceived prey was completely neutralized. Only when she was certain there was no threat did she begin to slowly release her coils and retreat to the back of her enclosure. Bob's assistant found him the next morning when she arrived for the daily feeding rounds. The python was coiled peacefully in her favorite hiding spot, showing no signs of agitation or stress. Bob's body bore the unmistakable marks of constriction, compressed ribs, restricted breathing passages, and the deep puncture wounds where the snake's teeth had initially grabbed him. The investigation revealed that Bob had violated multiple safety protocols in his attempt to quickly retrieve the dropped prey item. His death served as a stark reminder that large constrictors, regardless of their normal temperament or years of conditioning, remain powerful predators whose instincts can be triggered by the slightest provocation during feeding situations. But while Bob's incident involved one of the world's most powerful constrictors, another breeder was about to discover that even seemingly docile species can become deadly under the wrong circumstances, proving that in the world of reptile keeping, danger can come from the most unexpected sources. March 8, 2016 dawned clear and warm in Phoenix, Arizona, with temperatures climbing toward a pleasant 78 degrees by evening. The desert air was dry and still, creating perfect conditions for the large constrictors that thrived in Marcus Chen's converted garage facility. Marcus Chen was preparing to feed his largest snake at his home-based breeding operation, taking advantage of the mild evening weather that kept his facility at optimal temperatures. The 31-year-old had spent 8 years specializing in large constrictors and was well known in the reptile community for producing exceptional reticulated pythons. Marcus lived alone and often worked with the snakes during evening hours, a practice that would prove fatal. The converted garage facility where Marcus housed his collection was a marvel of reptile husbandry engineering. Custom-built enclosures provided adequate space for his largest specimens, while sophisticated climate control systems maintained the tropical conditions these Southeast Asian natives required. Marcus had invested heavily in security systems, both to protect his valuable animals and to ensure they couldn't escape. Marcus had acquired his prize reticulated python through a specialized reptile dealer who imported Southeast Asian species for serious collectors. The snake had been legally imported as a juvenile and required special permits. At 7:20 p.m., Marcus approached the enclosure housing his most impressive specimen, an 18-foot, 140-pound female reticulated python he had raised from a hatchling over the past 6 years. These serpents are among nature's most efficient predators, capable of growing over 30 feet in length and weighing more than 250 pounds in the wild. Reticulated pythons are ambush hunters that kill through constriction, wrapping their muscular bodies around prey and applying pressure that can exceed 90 pounds per square inch. The reticulated python's hunting strategy is a masterpiece of evolutionary engineering. These snakes possess incredibly sensitive heat-detecting organs that can locate warm-blooded prey from considerable distances. Their muscular bodies are perfectly designed for constriction, with hundreds of ribs providing anchor points for the powerful muscles that generate the crushing force. When constricting, these pythons don't crush their victims as commonly believed. Instead, they prevent breathing by tightening their coils each time the prey exhales, eventually causing cardiac arrest through oxygen deprivation. The process is remarkably efficient, with the snake able to detect the victim's heartbeat and breathing patterns through sensitive receptors along its body. Their incredible strength allows them to overpower animals as large as deer, wild boar, and even small crocodiles in their native Southeast Asia habitat. The python's heat-sensing abilities and lightning-fast reflexes make them nearly impossible to escape from once they've initiated an attack. Their strike speed can exceed 12 miles per hour, and their ability to accurately target warm-blooded animals in complete darkness makes them formidable predators. This particular female was in pre-shed condition, making her nearly blind and extremely defensive. Snakes preparing to shed their skin experience a condition called opaque or blue phase, where their eyes become clouded with a milky film and their vision is severely impaired. During this time, snakes become increasingly defensive and unpredictable, as their reduced vision makes them perceive any movement as a potential threat. Marcus made a critical decision that violated basic safety protocols. Instead of waiting for her to complete the shedding process or using proper feeding protocols from outside the enclosure, he entered her cage directly. This decision went against everything he had learned about large constrictor safety and contradicted the advice he regularly gave to other keepers. The moment Marcus stepped into the enclosure, the python struck defensively, grabbing his shoulder and immediately beginning to constrict. Her defensive response was instantaneous and overwhelming. 140 pounds of pure muscle wrapping around Marcus's torso with crushing force. The python's coils positioned themselves with deadly precision. One loop around his chest, another around his neck, effectively cutting off his ability to breathe or call for help. Marcus's phone was in his pocket, but the constricting pressure prevented him from reaching it or making any coordinated movements. The python's grip tightened with each of his attempts to struggle, her powerful muscles responding to his movements by increasing pressure. The snake's primitive brain had identified him as a threat to be neutralized, and her instincts demanded she maintain her grip until the perceived danger was eliminated. His neighbor found him the following evening when Marcus failed to answer repeated calls about a scheduled reptile pickup. The python had to be carefully removed by experienced animal control officers who understood the delicate process of unwrapping a constrictor without causing further harm. The incident became a rallying cry for enhanced safety protocols when working with large constrictors. This tragedy demonstrated the critical importance of never entering large constrictor enclosures and always having safety backup when working alone. Marcus's death served as a sobering reminder that even the most experienced keepers can make fatal errors in judgment, and that large constrictors, regardless of their normal temperament, remain powerful predators capable of killing humans. But while Marcus's death showed the lethal power of large snakes, another case was developing in Texas, where even the gentlest species would prove dangerous under unexpected circumstances. April 22, 2017 brought perfect spring weather to San Antonio, Texas, with clear skies and mild temperatures in the mid-70s creating ideal conditions for working with reptiles. The pleasant morning air made it comfortable to work in the facility without relying heavily on climate control systems. James Jimmy Rodriguez was photographing snakes at his commercial breeding facility, Lone Star Pythons, taking advantage of the excellent natural lighting that the clear morning provided. At 38, Jimmy ran one of Texas's largest ball python breeding operations and was respected throughout the reptile community for his genetic work with rare morphs. He had a history of minor heart problems, but managed them with medication and maintained an active lifestyle. Jimmy was known for his expertise with ball pythons, a species considered among the safest large snakes to handle due to their docile temperament. His facility housed hundreds of snakes, and he had been successfully breeding pythons for 12 years without serious incident. The commercial success of Lone Star Pythons had allowed Jimmy to expand his operation significantly over the years, growing from a hobby into a full-time business. At 6:30 a.m., Jimmy was photographing a valuable adult male ball python for online sales, part of his regular routine for marketing his animals to collectors worldwide. The 6-foot specimen represented the gentle nature that made ball pythons popular in the pet trade. Native to West and Central Africa, ball pythons are non-venomous constrictors that typically grow 3 to 5 feet in length, though exceptional specimens like this one can reach 6 feet. They're called ball pythons because of their tendency to curl into a tight ball when threatened, with their head protected in the center of their coiled body. Unlike their larger reticulated cousins, ball pythons are known for their calm demeanor and reluctance to bite. They're primarily nocturnal creatures that spend much of their time hiding in burrows or termite mounds in their native African habitat. When ball pythons do constrict, it's typically a gentle pressure compared to larger python species. However, they still possess the fundamental constricting instincts of all pythons. When they feel threatened or sense instability, they will wrap around whatever they perceive as secure and tighten their grip. Jimmy suddenly experienced crushing chest pain and shortness of breath, the unmistakable onset of a massive heart attack. The cardiac event struck without warning, sending waves of agony through his torso as his cardiovascular system began to fail. His breathing became labored and erratic as he collapsed to the floor, his body convulsing with the pain and stress of the medical emergency. As Jimmy collapsed, the python was still draped around his neck and torso in the relaxed position typical of calm ball pythons during handling. The snake, sensing Jimmy's sudden distress through his rapid heartbeat, irregular breathing, and the stress hormones flooding his system, immediately shifted from its relaxed state to defensive mode. The python's response was purely instinctual. When ball pythons feel threatened or sense that their environment has become unstable, they seek security by wrapping around whatever seems most stable. Under normal circumstances, Jimmy could have easily removed the docile snake with minimal effort. However, Jimmy's weakened state from the cardiac arrest prevented him from performing even these simple movements. The combination of the heart attack and the snake's natural constricting response created a deadly situation that neither Jimmy nor the python could have anticipated. Jimmy's assistant found him 3 hours later when arriving for the morning shift. The snake was still wrapped around him, not from aggression but from defensive instinct triggered by Jimmy's medical emergency. Despite immediate medical attention, the combination of cardiac distress and restricted breathing had proven fatal. The incident led to new recommendations for buddy systems in reptile facilities and highlighted the importance of having immediate backup when working with any constricting species, regardless of temperament. The tragedy demonstrated that even the most docile snakes could become inadvertently dangerous when their handlers experience medical emergencies. But while Jimmy's death was a tragic convergence of medical emergency and animal behavior, another case in Arizona would reveal an entirely different kind of hidden danger. August 11, 2015 brought scorching heat to Tucson, Arizona, with temperatures soaring past 110 degrees by mid-afternoon. The desert sun beat down mercilessly, making the climate-controlled research facility a welcome refuge from the brutal heat outside. Dr. Patricia Pat Williams was conducting routine maintenance at her private research facility, grateful for the air conditioning that kept her workspace at a comfortable temperature while the desert baked outside. At 45, Dr. Williams held a PhD in herpetology and operated a licensed facility that bred native venomous snakes for educational purposes. She had been working with venomous species for 15 years and was considered an expert on southwestern reptiles. She had been bitten twice before during her career, both times by copperheads, with minimal effects beyond standard localized symptoms. These previous incidents had followed typical patterns for copperhead envenomation: localized pain, swelling, and tissue damage that resolved with appropriate medical treatment. Her experience with these bites had given her confidence in her ability to handle copperhead encounters. At 2:15 p.m., while cleaning a copperhead enclosure, Pat was working with one of North America's most common venomous snakes. Copperheads are medium-sized pit vipers, typically growing 2 to 3 feet in length, with distinctive hourglass-shaped crossbands across their copper-colored bodies that provide excellent camouflage in their natural leaf litter habitat. They're found throughout the eastern United States and are responsible for more venomous snake bites than any other North American species, primarily because of their wide distribution and tendency to freeze when threatened rather than flee. The copperhead's defensive strategy is based on camouflage rather than aggression. These snakes have evolved coloration and patterns that make them nearly invisible when lying motionless among fallen leaves and forest debris. When threatened, copperheads typically remain perfectly still, relying on their camouflage to avoid detection. Copperhead venom is considered relatively mild compared to other pit vipers like rattlesnakes or cottonmouths. Their venom is primarily hemotoxic, containing enzymes that break down blood cells and tissue, causing localized damage, swelling, and pain. However, fatalities from copperhead bites are extremely rare in healthy adults, with most bites resulting in localized symptoms that resolve with proper medical treatment. The species is also known for dry bites, defensive strikes where little or no venom is injected, which occur in approximately 25% of copperhead encounters. These snakes are ambush predators that rely on their excellent camouflage to remain hidden while waiting for prey. Their heat-sensing pit organs can detect warm-blooded animals from several feet away, allowing them to strike with remarkable accuracy even in complete darkness. Copperheads are generally docile and prefer to remain motionless when humans approach, relying on their camouflage rather than aggressive behavior. They typically strike only when directly threatened, stepped on, or handled. And even then, many strikes are defensive warnings rather than serious attempts to inject venom. Pat was bitten on the hand when she momentarily lost focus during a phone call with a colleague about an upcoming research project. The copperhead's defensive strike was typical for the species, a quick bite and immediate release, more of a warning than a serious attack. The bite itself seemed almost insignificant at first, 2 small puncture wounds that barely bled, typical of a copperhead's relatively small fangs. However, this bite triggered an unprecedented reaction that Dr. Williams had never experienced before. Within minutes of the bite, she began experiencing symptoms that had nothing to do with the snake's venom. Her throat began to tighten, her breathing became labored, and hives erupted across her skin in a pattern consistent with severe allergic reaction. Years of exposure to snake proteins through handling, feeding, and research activities had sensitized her immune system without her knowledge. The allergic reaction developed with terrifying speed, overwhelming her body's normal responses to the relatively mild copperhead venom. Her airways began to close as histamines flooded her system, while her blood pressure dropped precipitously as her cardiovascular system went into shock. The familiar symptoms of copperhead envenomation were completely overshadowed by the life-threatening allergic response. Dr. Williams recognized the signs of anaphylaxis immediately and managed to administer her EpiPen while calling 911. Her scientific training allowed her to understand what was happening to her body, but the dual crisis of envenomation and allergic reaction created a medical emergency that went far beyond standard treatment protocols. The copperhead's venom, while mild by pit viper standards, began causing tissue damage and localized bleeding at the bite site. Simultaneously, the allergic reaction attacked her respiratory and cardiovascular systems, creating a cascade of complications that her body couldn't manage. Her airways continued to constrict despite the epinephrine, while the venom's anticoagulant properties interfered with her body's ability to clot properly. Dr. Williams died en route to the hospital, becoming the first documented case of fatal anaphylaxis triggered by a copperhead envenomation. Her death shocked the herpetological community and led to new recommendations for allergy testing among long-term reptile handlers. The tragedy revealed that even experienced professionals could develop hidden sensitivities to the animals they'd worked with safely for years. But while Pat's death revealed hidden medical risks that had developed over years of exposure, the final case in our series would prove that sometimes the greatest danger comes not from the snakes themselves, but from the very equipment meant to protect them during emergencies. December 3rd, 2013 brought the worst ice storm in decades to the mountains of North Carolina, with freezing rain coating everything in a treacherous layer of ice. By evening, temperatures had plummeted to well below freezing, and the rural areas around Asheville were locked in a crystalline grip that snapped power lines and left thousands without electricity. Snake Steve Morrison was dealing with the severe power outage at his rural breeding facility, watching nervously as the temperature continued to drop, and his backup heating system strained against the bitter cold. At 52, Steve had been breeding native venomous species for 22 years, supplying educational institutions and zoos throughout the Southeast with specimens for research and educational programs. He was considered an expert on southeastern venomous snakes and lived alone on his remote mountain property. Steve had invested heavily in backup systems to protect his animals during emergencies, understanding the critical nature of maintaining proper temperatures for his cold-blooded charges. His facility included backup generators, battery-powered heating systems, and emergency protocols designed to keep his animals alive during power outages and other emergencies. During the ice storm that knocked out power, Steve brought a small generator into his attached garage to power essential heating systems for his snakes. The decision seemed logical. His animals' lives depended on maintaining proper temperatures, and the generator could provide the necessary electricity to keep critical heating systems running. However, Steve underestimated the ventilation requirements for safe generator operation in an enclosed space. The attached garage, sealed against the winter cold, began filling with carbon monoxide as the generator ran continuously. The colorless, odorless gas accumulated steadily as Steve worked frantically to maintain his animals' life support systems, unaware that he was slowly poisoning himself with each breath. Carbon monoxide is particularly insidious because it binds to hemoglobin more readily than oxygen, gradually reducing the body's ability to carry oxygen to vital organs. As CO2 levels rose throughout the evening, Steve became increasingly disoriented and failed to notice that vibrations from the generator had loosened a cage latch, allowing a 4-foot timber rattlesnake to escape onto the garage floor. The constant vibration from the running generator had gradually worked the latch mechanism loose, a failure that Steve would have immediately noticed under normal circumstances. The escaped timber rattlesnake represented one of the most dangerous species in Steve's collection. Also known as the canebrake rattlesnake in some regions, timber rattlesnakes are among the most formidable venomous snakes in North America. These heavy-bodied pit vipers can grow up to 6 feet in length and possess potent venom that combines both hemotoxic and neurotoxic properties, causing tissue destruction, blood clotting disorders, and nervous system damage that can be fatal if left untreated. Timber rattlesnakes are known for their generally docile nature compared to other rattlesnake species, often remaining motionless and relying on their excellent camouflage when threatened. Their coloration provides perfect camouflage among fallen leaves and forest debris. However, timber rattlesnakes will strike defensively when stepped on, cornered, or directly contacted. Their venom yield is substantial. A single bite can inject 100 to 150 milligrams of venom, with as little as 100 milligrams potentially fatal to an adult human. These snakes are ambush predators that can remain motionless for hours or even days while waiting for prey to come within striking range. Their heat-sensing pit organs allow them to detect warm-blooded animals with remarkable precision, even in complete darkness. When they do strike, their speed is explosive. They can extend their bodies nearly their full length in a fraction of a second. In his severely impaired state from carbon monoxide poisoning, Steve didn't see the snake coiled on the floor near his workbench and stepped directly onto it while checking equipment connections. The timber rattlesnake's response was purely defensive, a quick strike to the perceived threat followed by an immediate retreat to a defensive coil. The bite delivered a substantial dose of venom into Steve's ankle, penetrating deep into the tissue and immediately beginning the process of tissue destruction and systemic toxicity. Under normal circumstances, Steve would have immediately recognized the severity of the situation and implemented his well-rehearsed emergency protocols. However, the carbon monoxide poisoning had severely impaired his cognitive function, preventing him from thinking clearly about the protocols he had followed successfully over 2 decades. Steve became confused about the bite's significance and delayed calling for help. The combination of carbon monoxide poisoning and timber rattlesnake envenomation created a deadly synergy that attacked multiple organ systems simultaneously. The CO2 prevented his blood from carrying oxygen effectively, while the snake's venom caused additional respiratory depression and cardiac complications. Steve lost consciousness sometime after midnight, never realizing that his emergency solution had become his death trap. Emergency responders found him the next morning after neighbors reported concerns about generator exhaust visible from his property. The timber rattlesnake was discovered coiled peacefully in a corner of the garage, having returned to its preferred hiding behavior after the defensive strike. The incident led to mandatory carbon monoxide detector requirements for backup power systems in reptile facilities, and served as a sobering reminder that even emergency situations can create cascading failures that turn life-saving equipment into deadly hazards. Steve's death demonstrated how emergency situations can impair judgment and create dangerous conditions that experienced professionals might not anticipate. It was March 15, 2017, near Palu, Central Sulawesi. The air was heavy with humidity, and the fading light gave the swampy lowlands a muted greenish haze. It was the kind of evening where the bush seemed still on the surface, yet alive with hidden movement. By nightfall, the shortcut Aegis Hartono had taken hundreds of times would become the scene of an encounter few could survive. Aegis, 49, had worked in palm oil plantations since his teens. He was known among his co-workers for moving quickly through tasks and avoiding unnecessary breaks. People said he disliked relying on others for rides, and often boasted that decades of outdoor work had made him unfazed by the wildlife. The shortcut home along a narrow drainage path saved him nearly 20 minutes, and he had walked it for years despite thick vegetation and poorly drained sections that could flood ankle deep in the rainy season. That day, he had stayed late to finish clearing a section of overgrowth. A co-worker offered him a lift back to the village, but Aegis waved it off, saying the weather was clear. Villagers had spoken over the past week about a large snake sighted in the area. Some estimated it over 20 feet, but sightings were not unusual, and Aegis dismissed them as exaggerated. His machete hung at his side, more a tool than a weapon in his mind. The drainage path was a narrow strip of firm ground bordered by stagnant water and stands of nipa palm. The air smelled of decaying vegetation, and the clouds of mosquitoes clung to the shade. On one side, brush leaned over the path in heavy clusters. On the other, the canal's surface was broken only by occasional ripples. Dusk blurred the edges of the water and ground, making it difficult to see where one ended and the other began. Reticulated pythons in this region can reach lengths of over 25 feet, weigh over 200 pounds, with girth as thick as a grown man's thigh. They ambush from cover, striking with surprising speed for their size. Once coiled, they tighten with each breath their prey exhales, collapsing the chest until air can no longer enter. Large individuals are capable of subduing animals heavier than the human, and in rare cases, they've been recorded attempting to consume people whole. Two men walking parallel along a dirt road on the opposite side of the canal later said they heard a sharp splash, followed by a muffled yell. Looking toward the sound, they saw Aegis stumble backward, his machete swinging in jerks. The python had come from the brush beside the canal, striking high and wrapping its body around his torso. Its tail coiled low around his legs, pulling him off balance. Aegis tried to hack at the snake's body, but each swing was short and awkward. The coils locked tighter with each movement, compressing his ribs until his shouts turned into short, ragged gasps. One of the men ran down the embankment and grabbed the python's tail, attempting to pull it free, but the force of the snake's movements threw him sideways into the mud. The struggle lasted several minutes. Witnesses described the sound of Aegis's breathing stopping abruptly, his head dropping forward. The python held its grip even after he went still, adjusting the coil slightly to maintain pressure. When villagers arrived in response to the shouting, they brought more machetes and began hacking at the thick, patterned body. The snake did not release him until its head and several feet of its neck were severed. When the coils loosened, the python's intention became clear. It had already begun to position Aegis's head toward its mouth. Villagers pulled his body free before the swallowing attempt advanced. His face was smeared with mud, and his machete was still in his right hand. One man ran to the village to call for medical help, while others attempted chest compressions on the spot. Paramedics from the nearest clinic arrived nearly 30 minutes later, confirming he had no pulse. A brief autopsy performed the next day at the local health center reported multiple rib fractures, deep contusions around the chest and abdomen consistent with constriction, and signs of asphyxiation as the cause of death. Aegis's funeral was held that afternoon in accordance with local Muslim customs, with the body washed, shrouded and buried before sunset. Dozens of villagers attended, some still shaken by the attack, and prayers were offered for his family's safety. Local authorities documented the scene, measured the snake, and took statements from witnesses for their incident report. Wildlife officers disposed of the carcass and issued renewed warnings to plantation workers about avoiding isolated drainage paths after dusk. Agus's mistake served as a brutal reminder that these predators strike without warning. Meanwhile, in Thailand, a snake breeder's overconfidence with his most prized specimen would end in tragedy. It was June 21, 2015, in Nakhon Si Thammarat Province, Thailand. The air was thick from a storm that had rolled through an hour earlier, leaving puddles in the dirt and a faint smell of wet earth. The overcast sky dimmed the daylight, and in the low light of the snake shed, movements inside the cages seemed sharper, more deliberate. Somchai Phan, who had made a career out of handling dangerous reptiles, was about to break one of the first rules he used to teach beginners: never clean a venomous snake's enclosure without removing the animal. Somchai was 36, the son of a rice farmer who had turned his fascination with snakes into a livelihood. Over the past 12 years, he had supplied local reptile parks with cobras, vipers, and pythons, earning a reputation for being both skilled and fearless. He lived with his wife and young daughter in a small house behind his breeding facility. Though careful with most of his animals, he believed his 13-foot king cobra, raised from a hatchling, recognized him. It was his most prized specimen, and he often showed it off to friends, demonstrating what he called its calm nature. On that afternoon, he had invited 2 locals to see the snake. His assistant, familiar with its moods, advised against working inside the enclosure while the cobra remained in it. Somchai dismissed the concern, saying the storm's cooler air would make the animal sluggish. The cobra lay stretched along the far wall of its pen, its head elevated slightly, tongue flicking. Somchai entered with a bucket and a rag, intending to replace the water bowl and wipe down the floor. The shed was built from corrugated metal, the walls lined with wooden enclosures. Rain dripped steadily from the roof edges outside, and the air carried the damp organic smell of reptile bedding. The cobra's pen was 6 feet deep with a clear acrylic front panel, giving the friends a direct view of the animal's movements. The dim light made its scales glint a muted olive, broken by pale bands on its hood. King cobras, the largest venomous snakes in the world, can reach over 18 feet and weigh up to 20 pounds. They can deliver enough neurotoxic venom in a single bite to kill an elephant. Unlike many snakes, they'll hold their ground and can rear up to a third of their body length, striking from a distance that surprises even experienced handlers. Cooler temperatures often make them more alert rather than sluggish, and storms can heighten their defensive responses. The first warning came when the snake's head lifted higher, hood widening as Somchai reached toward the water bowl. His friends saw the body shift, muscles tightening in subtle waves. Somchai tapped lightly at the hood with the back of his hand, a demonstration he had done before. The cobra's strike was almost silent, a blur covering the 3-foot gap. Its fangs sank deep into his left forearm. Somchai jerked back, clutching his arm but laughing in what appeared to be bravado. He told the onlookers he knew how to handle a bite, even as 2 puncture wounds welled blood down his wrist. His assistant grabbed a cloth, tying it tightly above the elbow while attempting mouth suction, a method widely known to be ineffective. Within 90 seconds, Somchai's voice thickened, and he swayed on his feet. His pupils narrowed, and his breathing grew shallow. The 2 friends helped lower him to the floor, his machete for cleaning still lying near the enclosure door. The cobra remained in the pen, hood still spread, watching the movement outside its glass front. Starting the 40-minute drive to the nearest hospital. 5 minutes into the trip, his limbs went limp and his breathing became faint, punctuated by brief gasps. The assistant attempted mouth-to-mouth resuscitation while the truck sped along the narrow road. By the time they reached the hospital gates, Somchai's chest had stopped moving. Medical staff attempted to ventilate him, but the neurotoxin had already paralyzed his respiratory muscles. He was pronounced dead within minutes of arrival. Back at the facility, authorities arrived to secure the cobra and other venomous snakes. The king cobra, still coiled in the same spot, was removed under strict containment protocols. The rest of the snakes were confiscated, citing improper safety measures and the risk to the surrounding community. Somchai's funeral was held the next day in the village temple, attended by family, friends, and several local park operators who had worked with him over the years. His assistant spoke briefly about the dangers of overconfidence, noting that Somchai had taught others to respect the unpredictability of snakes, but had forgotten that lesson himself in the moment. The incident prompted a short-lived discussion among local authorities about licensing and safety standards for private venomous snake keepers, though no formal changes were made. Yet, even as Somchai's fatal overconfidence became a proof that serpents remain unpredictable regardless of years of handling, just over a year later in the Amazon, a fisherman's simple dare would bring him face to face with a green anaconda. It was October 4th, 2016, near Barcelos in the Brazilian state of the Amazonas. The river was calm under a heavy, humid sky, the water reflecting a dull green from the dense forest canopy. For those who knew its currents and depths, it was an ordinary day. For Joe Silva, the river he had worked on since boyhood would become the place he would not leave alive. Joe was 28, a fisherman like his father and grandfather. He was known among locals for his strong swimming and habit of entering the water even when others stayed ashore. He lived in a small wooden house near the docks with his wife and 2 children, and most of his income came from selling tuna carre and piranha to the market in Barcelos. Joe prided himself on being capable in the river, often telling others that the dangers were overstated, that people were too quick to let fear guide them. His work demanded long hours and constant adaptation to shifting river conditions, and in his mind, swimming was simply another skill he had mastered. This trip upriver had been routine, a 3-day run with 2 close friends, catching and cleaning fish to bring home before the next weather shift. That morning they had filled the large cooler with their catch. While cleaning the fish at the muddy bank of a narrow channel, Joe had been teased for his reluctance to accept a dare from one of his friends: swim across the water and back. The channel wasn't wide, barely 30 yards. The channel itself was part of a floodplain network where large predators hunted. Green anacondas, the largest snakes in the Americas, can reach over 20 feet in length and weigh more than 200 pounds. They're ambush hunters, often lying motionless in shallow water, relying on camouflage to get close before striking. Their bite is used to secure prey before their coils constrict it. Attacks on humans are rare, but not unheard of in more remote stretches, especially during the dry season when prey grows scarce and water levels drop, forcing both fish and predators into tighter spaces. There had been warnings that week. Other fishermen mentioned seeing large ripples and brief flashes of dark scales in that channel. One man claimed a cow had gone missing near its banks just 2 weeks earlier. Joe had heard the talk but laughed it off, telling his friends he had swum there before without trouble. The dares at the cleaning site felt more like routine banter than a serious challenge. Without hesitation, he waded in, pushing through the surface vegetation until the muddy slope dropped away beneath his feet. The water was opaque, warm against his skin. He struck out with a strong breaststroke, keeping his head above the patches of floating grass. About halfway across, his right leg brushed something thick and unyielding. He kicked harder, assuming it was a submerged branch. The branch moved. In the next instant, something seized his upper arm with crushing force. His body jolted sideways, and he let out a sharp cry. From the bank, his friend saw a thick, dark body surge upward just enough for them to make out its size, thicker than a man's thigh. The snake's head broke the surface. Its jaws locked onto Joe's bicep. In the same motion, it wrapped its body around his torso, the coil sliding with a slow, purposeful grip. Joe's arms flailed above the water, then pressed desperately against the tightening loops. One of his friends grabbed a machete and ran into the water, shouting as he slashed toward the snake. But the anaconda began a slow roll, pulling Joe under. The rescuer got within a few feet, but couldn't see where to strike without risking hitting Joe. The water churned with bubbles and silt. Then, in a sudden lurch, both man and snake vanished beneath the surface. The rescuer surfaced seconds later, coughing and gasping, his hands empty. He waded back to the bank, scanning for movement, but the channel was calm again, only the floating vegetation shifting slightly as if settling back into place. They shouted for help from passing boats and used the radio to alert local authorities. It took 15 minutes of searching before Joe's body was found, floating near the opposite bank. His skin was mottled with deep bruises across his chest and abdomen where the coils had constricted. The upper arm bore two deep arcs of puncture wounds, matching the placement of the snake's fangs. His face was pale, his eyes half closed, his limbs limp in the current. They pulled him ashore in silence, laying him out on the muddy grass. The cooler of fish was left behind as the men wrapped Joe in the tarp and brought him back downriver. His funeral took place the next morning in a small riverside chapel, attended by family, neighbors, and fellow fishermen. His wife sat beside the casket, silent except when speaking to their children. Local authorities issued a reminder to avoid secluded channels during the low water months, citing reduced prey availability and increased predator activity. The advice echoed through the fishing community for a short time before fading back into the background of the many other risks the river always carried. Even though Joe's recklessness ended in the mercy of an anaconda thousands of miles away in Florida, a retiree's stubbornness would bring him within striking distance of a venomous rattlesnake. It was July 29, 2018, near Ocala, Florida. The late summer heat sat heavy over the neighborhood, the air thick with humidity and the constant buzz of cicadas. In the quiet stretch of the afternoon, the stillness of a backyard chicken coop would be broken by a decision that, once made, could not be undone. Robert Miller was 61, a retired auto mechanic who had spent most of his life working in repair shops around Marion County. He was known among friends and neighbors for his stubborn self-reliance and habit of dealing with wildlife on his own terms. For years, he had caught non-venomous snakes barehanded, often showing them off to his grandchildren before letting them go. It was a mix of bravado and habit, something he had done since he was young, and something he believed showed his control over the hazards of rural life. That day, Robert had been tending his small backyard coop, a dozen chickens scratching through the dirt for feed. He took pride in the coop, repairing it himself after storms and keeping it free from predators when he could. Snakes were not unusual visitors, drawn by eggs and small chicks. He rarely saw them as a threat to himself, only to the birds. The idea of calling animal control for a snake in his own yard felt unnecessary to him, something a capable man shouldn't need. The yard was lined with wire fencing and shaded by a few drooping oaks. The air smelled faintly of feed and damp soil. Beyond the coop, the grass grew patchy and uneven, the ground dotted with tire ruts from an old riding mower. A porch ran along the side of Robert's house, where his neighbor, Mark, sat in a weathered chair 40 feet away. In the bright Florida sun, a movement near the coop's nesting box caught Robert's attention. Eastern diamondback rattlesnakes are the largest rattlesnake species in North America, often exceeding 6 feet in length and weighing over 10 pounds. They carry potent hemotoxic venom capable of causing rapid tissue destruction, internal bleeding, and severe cardiovascular collapse. Though they typically avoid humans, they will stand their ground if threatened, relying on camouflage until cornered, then using their rattle as a final warning before striking. Mark saw the snake first and called out to Robert, telling him to use a stick or call for help. The diamond-shaped head and thick patterned body were unmistakable even from a distance. Robert brushed off the advice, stepping into the coop and positioning himself behind the reptile. The snake held still at first, relying on its coloration to blend against the dry grass and shadowed boards. Then, as Robert reached down, the rattle sounded, short, sharp bursts cutting through the humid air. Robert moved quickly, grabbing the snake just behind the head, his fingers clamping the thick neck. He lifted it up, turning toward the porch with a grin. The snake's body writhed violently, its coils twisting in the air, the heavy tail shaking. Mark shouted again for him to drop it, but Robert only adjusted his grip, shifting his weight slightly to keep balance on the uneven ground. The movement was small, almost invisible from the porch, but his grip slipped. The snake's neck flexed just long enough for its head to swing sideways. In one fast motion, the fang sank deep into Robert's left wrist, just above the joint. His hand jerked open and the snake fell, landing in the dust before sliding quickly toward the fence line. Robert stepped back but didn't retreat entirely, muttering that it wasn't serious. Mark saw the swelling begin within minutes. Robert's wrist reddened and puffed up, the skin stretched tight. He sat down heavily on the edge of the coop, breathing harder, his face damp with sweat. Mark called 911, keeping his eyes on Robert, who leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, his shoulders rising and falling faster. By the time the paramedics arrived, 12 minutes later, Robert's skin had taken on a pale, clammy hue, and he was struggling to keep his head up. The paramedics worked quickly, loading him onto a stretcher and securing an oxygen mask. His blood pressure was already dangerously low, and his pulse was erratic. They began fluids and tried to keep him responsive, but his breathing slowed further on the short drive toward Ocala Regional Medical Center. Additionally, the bite struck a vein, accelerating the venom spread. He went into cardiac arrest before arrival and was pronounced dead minutes later. The county medical examiner noted 2 deep puncture wounds with surrounding tissue damage consistent with an eastern diamondback bite. The venom had caused rapid cardiovascular collapse, a severe reaction made worse by the location of the bite and the time to treatment. Robert's family was notified that evening, his wife and 2 daughters gathering quietly at the house. The funeral took place 3 days later, a small gathering under a canvas tent at the local cemetery. Only close relatives attended, along with a handful of neighbors. There were no speeches beyond a short prayer. County wildlife officers later issued a statement urging residents to avoid handling venomous snakes without proper equipment or training. Robert's overconfidence with a backyard rattlesnake proved fatal in Florida. Meanwhile,